I'm going to tell you my story, and in many ways it's your story. And I want to tell you about how we're going to change the world. We're going to keep changing the world. This race is changing the world. This race is one of only 4 all-women marathons in the world. And that speaks volumes, not only for women, but it speaks volumes for all of Southeast Asia. The world is watching us tomorrow, ladies. It is going to be such a great show. Before I go any further, I just really want to thank Karen Lowe and her fabulous team for putting this together. Karen Lowe is a pioneer of our time. All right, now no show would be right if I didn't tell you the story of the famous Boston Marathon. Everybody wants to hear that story. But more importantly is, how did that begin? And how did that change my life? That Boston Marathon changed my life. And therefore, it changed millions of women's lives. It changed the lives of every man and woman in this room today. And it's an amazing story because it started very innocently. It started with a 12-year-old girl, that was me, who was so nervous in school. I was afraid I could not make my school's field hockey team. And I was only 12 years old, and I was already in high school. And my father said, honey, it's really simple. Go out and run a kilometer a day, and you'll make the field hockey team. And I said, I can't run that far. He said, sure you can. So I had this reinforcement from my father, who helped me start running a kilometer a day when I was 12 years old. And what happened? Of course I made the field hockey team. But more importantly, because all of you remember the day you ran that first kilometer, right? I had a sense of empowerment and self-esteem that nobody could take away from me. Every day I had a victory under my belt nobody could take away from me. I'm 66 years old. I have been running for 53 years, and every day I have a victory under my belt nobody could take away from me. And I know you all feel like this. I say it's magic, but really it is a transformational experience. And that each of us are passing this on to our sisters around the world. We'll talk more about that in a minute. University, a big school in the United States, to study journalism. There were no women's sports in this university, so I was feeling very strong, and I asked the men's athletics coach if I could run on the men's cross-country team. And he goes, I've been the coach here for 30 years. We have never had a girl before. And he said, but you know what? You can't run with the men. It's against the rules. But we'd welcome you. We'd welcome you to come and work out with the team, to train with the team. So I came out, I began to run with the team, and it was amazing. All these guys were so nice to me. Does any woman in this room have a guy who's not nice to her in running? No. The guys in running are wonderful and have always been wonderful to us. They've helped us enormously be where we are today. So as I was running with these guys, they were so fast and so strong, I was so slow, that the assistant coach, who turned out not to be really a coach, but the university's mailman, came up and he said, I'll run with you. And he was really, really old. This guy was 50 years old. Can you imagine? It's very old to a girl who's only 19. And he helped me every day with my running. And it turns out that this guy, with bad knees, bad Achilles, could still keep up with me. And he would tell me stories about the greatest day of his life, which was something called the Boston Marathon. And he thought he was never going to run the Boston Marathon again. He run it 15 times. Every night he would tell me another story about the Boston Marathon. And pretty soon I fell in love with the Boston Marathon. I said to him one night, we were kind of arguing. I was in a tired mood. And he was telling me a story about the Boston Marathon. And I said, oh, Arnie, let's quit talking about it and just run it. And he said, but a woman can't run the Boston Marathon. I said, what? And he said, women are too weak, too fragile. And I said, that's ridiculous. And he said, if you show me in practice, I'll take you to Boston. Now, we trained very hard, and one day we ran I would turn into man, and every day I was running and I went longer and longer and longer. I felt like I was discovering the world. So I felt like Magellan, and he now was so excited about what women's capability is all about. Well, of course, now we know indeed women do have more potential than men, actually, in endurance and stamina. We'll never be as big as men. We'll never be as fast. We'll never be as strong. We'll never be able to lift as much, throw as far, jump as high. But we can run forever. We can run consistently forever. We're more flexible, and we have more balance. The situation right now is men have had sports for 2,000 years, and women have had sports for 50 years. And we're catching up very quickly. So I want you to think, and what we're going to talk about in the panel that's coming up is what the future of women's sports may look like, and what role you may be taking part in this. Okay, now another quick story, and then we're going to look at this videotape, which is unbelievable. 2 weeks before the Boston Marathon, my boyfriend at the university, who was a 235-pound, how many kilos is that? 160 kilos? 130 kilos? About 130 kilos hammer thrower, you know? Really big guy, former All-American football player. And he just thought he was the greatest athlete in the world. And we were having a drink one night, a beer at the college bar. And he said, "How's your jogging coming?" I said, "I may be slow, but I'm a runner." And he said, "Yeah, right." And I said, "In fact, Arnie and I are going to go run the Boston Marathon in 2 weeks." And he goes, he said, "No, you're not. A marathon is 42.2 Ks." And I said, "Tom, I know how far it is. I've run the distance already in practice." And he got very quiet. And he sat there for a minute, and he said, "Then I'm going to go to Boston too." I said, "What? You've never run over 2 kilometers in your life." And he said, "If a girl can do it, I can do it." I said, "Tom, height-weight ratio. You're going to carry 130 kgs over 26 miles, over 42 kgs. If a girl can do it, I can do it." I said, "Tom, you have to train for a marathon. If a girl can do it, I can do it." I said, "Okay, come to Boston." Okay, so at this point, I'd like to show you a videotape. This was just part recently of a big documentary done a month ago in the United States. And so Meryl Streep is now going to tell you my story. So, William, if we can have Meryl Streep, thank you.
Boston Marathon was run in some of the worst conditions in race history. While most of the crowd was focused on the front of the pack, another runner was making a stir far behind.
The idea of running long distance was always considered very questionable for women because, you know, an arduous activity would mean that you're going to get big legs, and grow a mustache, and hair on your chest, and your uterus was going to fall out.
In 1967, Kathrine Switzer was a junior at Syracuse University. Because Syracuse had no women's track team, she began training with the manager of the men's team, a part-time mailman named Arnie Briggs.
It was Arnie who told me about the greatest day in his life every year, which was the Boston Marathon. And we were out running, and Arnie began telling me another Boston Marathon story. And I said, "Oh, Arnie, let's just quit talking about the darn marathon and run it." And my dream then became to prove that I could run 26 miles, 385 yards.
For 70 years, the Boston Marathon had excluded women. But Switzer entered using just her initials.
We walked to the start, and the gun went off, and down the street we went. So there we were, Arnie Briggs, the 50-year-old mailman, and me, the 20-year-old college student. my boyfriend Tom Miller, the ex-All-American football player. When other runners would come by, they would say, "Oh, it's a girl!" And they were so excited. And all of a sudden, the press truck is in front of us, and they're taking, pictures of us. On this truck was the race director, the feisty guy by the name of Jock Semple. He just stopped the bus, jumped off, and ran after me. And he just grabbed me and screamed at me, "Get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers." He had the fiercest face of any guy I'd ever seen. And all of a sudden, Big Tom, my boyfriend, came with a streak and gave Jock the most incredible crossbody block and sent Jock flying right through the air and landed on the curb. And all of this happened in front of the press truck. Journalists got very aggressive. "What are you trying to prove? Are you a suffragette? Are you a crusader?" Whatever that is, And I said, "What? I'm just trying to run." Then it got very quiet. The snow's coming down. Nobody's saying anything. And I turned to Arnie and I said, "Arnie, I'm going to finish this race on my hands and my knees if I have to. If I don't finish this race, then everybody's going to believe women can't do it. I've got to finish this race." I finished that race in 4 hours, 20 minutes. It wasn't until we stopped on the thruway to get an ice cream and some coffee that we see the newspapers and the coverage front and back of all different editions with the pictures. I realized that now this was very, very important, and this was going to change my life, and it was probably going to change women's sports. There is an expression in a marathon that you do go through sort of a lifetime of experience. And I often say that I started the Boston Marathon as a girl, and I finished the Boston Marathon as a grown woman.
There's that moment that changes us forever. And sometimes it's the worst thing that ever happened to you. That was a terrible thing that happened to me. I was scared, I was terrified, and I had to finish the race, and I had 40 kilometers of headwind, sleet, and snow, and everybody except the men around me wanting me to fail. And I got more and more determined. And in a marathon, every kilometer you go, you get more and more determined. And then at the end of the race, you have come to a lot of conclusions. I no longer was angry with that official. I understood that he was exhausted and he was just a product of his time. But I was determined to change the situation. And I had no idea it would become as big as it was. But the more you do, the more you can do. You take a step, you run 10 Ks, you can run 15 Ks. You run 15 Ks, suddenly you can run 30. Same in life, the more you do, you suddenly realize, hey, I got that job, why can't I get an executive position? You get an executive position, you say, why can't I own the company? Right? You're limitless. And so when I finished the Boston Marathon, I said, okay, I'm going to create opportunities for women in running. I don't know how, but somehow I'm going to do it. I knew that talent was everywhere. It only needs an opportunity. Always remember that. If you remember nothing from what I've told you today, remember that. Talent is everywhere. In each of you, in your sisters, your daughters, your mother, your neighbors. It only needs an opportunity. And that's what Karen Lowe knows. That's why she's created this event for you. Opportunity is everywhere. And I started organizing women's races. And because I was a journalist, I began writing proposals. And I took my ideas, my dream of creating a series of races around the world and getting great sponsorship for it and making it glamorous and making it accessible and making it unintimidating for women. And eventually I got Avon Cosmetics to sponsor my idea. They hired me. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. And we began organizing events all over the world. Eventually, we had races in 27 countries, 400 races, 27 countries, and 1 million women. And what happened then? We could leverage all of those races and lobby the International Olympic Committee with all of those countries to get the women's marathon event in the Olympic Games. And I knew that that was the event that was going to change history. Why? because everybody in the world knows that 42.2 Ks is a long way to run. And when they saw women on global television, not just in a race, but billions of people watched it on television, they knew that women could do anything. Because if a man runs a marathon or a woman runs a marathon, if you can run a marathon, you can do anything. And when the Joe Benoit Sanderson came into that Olympic stadium and 90,000 people jumped to their feet, I said, it's not even the 90,000, it's the people around the world. The tradition-bound households from Indiana to Afghanistan, we're going to realize that women can do anything. That's why that race is so important. That's why this race continues to make it so important to reach out and give you an opportunity. I didn't tell you about my own running. Again, talking about limitlessness, I finished that race in 4 hours and 20 minutes, and I had two determinations. One, to create those opportunities. The other was to become a better athlete. Becoming a better athlete is a 30-second story. Training works. If you're willing to put in the time, all of us can be a lot better than we are. Maybe it isn't important to you. It was important to me. I wanted the credibility. I also wanted to test my limits. Frankly, I trained hard. I trained so hard, I can't tell you. I was doing 130 Ks a week, 2 workouts a day, marathon every Sunday, and finally, after 35 marathons, I won the New York City Marathon and ran a 2:51.
Woo!
And, you know, for a little girl who remembers how hard the first mile was, and remembers running 4 hours and 20 minutes for Boston and plenty of marathons in 5 hours, to run a 2:51, being not talented, because I'm not talented. I just work hard. And I just said, if I can do that, anybody can do that if they're willing to work hard. And so that's why getting the marathon in the Olympic Games is so important. So that's what I want you to think about in terms of opportunities. Now the last thing, just 5 minutes, because we're going to bring up our wonderful panelists, and this is what we're going to be talking about also as a group, is what is our future going to look like? Already in North America, there are more women runners than men. 53% of all the runners in North America are women. That's something that happened. Can you imagine? I was the only woman, and now 53% of the whole country is women in terms of running. And now we also have parity in the Olympic Games, and we have unlimited opportunities. All we need to do is put on a pair of shoes and go out the door. Having said that, there are many countries in the world who don't even let women go outside. And we need to reach these women. There are women in Africa, there are women in the Mideast, and there are women all over the world who just simply do not have the courage or the ability to go out. And I maintain a couple of things, is that running makes us fearless. And among women who can't get out the door and run, we can help them be fearless, because running isn't just about running, it's about changing our lives, and it's about communication. So try to communicate with your sisters everywhere, impart the philosophy of running to them, even if they can only virtually run. And we can help change their lives fearlessly in a very significant way. I want you to think about women being really good at endurance, stamina, flexibility, and balance. Where is that going to lead us? The Olympic Games in 50 years is going to bear no resemblance to what it is right now. We're going to have sports everywhere. They're as popular and publicizable as men. And you know what? You guys are younger than I am, and you're going to create it. Think about Karen Lowe. She's creating it. What can you create? What can you contribute to make this happen? It's a great career. Imagine it. You can do this, you can do anything, okay? And I guess the last thing I'd just like to say is, of course, a final note about aging, right? I have to talk about aging. Again, the more you do, the more you can do. Running is the best thing you can do for yourself, or walking. Why? Because it slows the aging process. We know this scientifically, that it slows the aging process. It keeps your bone mass strong. The number one cause of death in the elderly is falling and breaking a bone. All right? Is heart disease. Running helps prevent all of these things. So run as long as you can. Walk as long as you can. Get out and move. That is one of the most important things. So lastly, I'm going to bring up the panel here in just a minute. I want to wish you luck tomorrow. I'll be also talking in the panel. I want you to start slow and finish fast. That's my biggest tip, because if you start fast, you always finish slow. So have plenty in the tank for the second half of your race. Enjoy the experience. For those of you who are doing your first event, throw away your watch. Okay? You're never going to forget your first 8K, your first half marathon, or your first marathon. Enjoy the experience. Do not be bound by this. From now on after this, you're going to be bound by this. So free yourself and just enjoy the experience. After the panel, I'd love to talk to you. We'll get a picture together, sign a book or whatever. And but I want to thank you so much for this wonderful occasion, for changing women's lives, and we're making history together. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathrine. Yeah, that has been the